Don't let her sit at the head of the table. It's embarrassing. She acts like she still owns the place. I was standing in the hallway with a casserole dish in both hands, warm through the oven mitts, when my daughter-in-law said it. Her voice carried the way voices do in old houses, through the plaster walls, around the corners, straight into you. My son didn't say anything back. That was almost worse. I stood still. The dish was getting heavy. I'd been making that sweet potato casserole for 32 years, the one with the brown sugar crust and the pecans pressed in a ring around the edge. My mother taught me to make it. I taught my son to eat it. His daughters had asked for the recipe twice and still hadn't made it once. I carried it into the kitchen, set it on the counter, and went back upstairs. Nobody heard me. Nobody noticed I'd gone. My name is Ruth Calloway. I am 68 years old. I have one son, Daniel, and one daughter-in-law, Patricia. I have two granddaughters, Lily and June. I have a house that I do not own anymore, and a silence I have been carrying so long it has worn grooves in my shoulders, but I am getting ahead of myself. 3 years ago, Daniel called me on a Tuesday night, which was unusual. He called on Sundays, always around 7, and always for about 12 minutes. I know because I started timing them the year Patricia stopped coming to the phone. He told me they had found a house. A good house, he said. 4 bedrooms, good school district, a yard big enough for the girls to run in. The kind of house he'd always said he wanted. The kind I had raised him in, except his would have a finished basement and a 2-car garage and a mortgage that sat just outside what they could reasonably afford. He didn't ask. He explained, and then he waited, which is a kind of asking. I said, "How much do you need?" He told me. I was quiet for a moment, not from hesitation, but from doing the math. It was the down payment, the full 20%, plus the closing costs, plus 3 months of reserves the lender required. It was a number that used to feel impossible to me, and had become possible only because I'd spent the better part of 40 years not spending money I could have spent. My husband Warren had been gone for 6 years by then. He died before we could take the trip to Portugal we'd been talking about since 1987. He died before we bought the boat he kept pricing in catalogs. He died before we did most of the things we said we'd do someday, and he left me the house we'd paid off together, and the savings account we'd never touched, and the habit of being careful. I sold a piece of land my father had left me in Tennessee, a thin slice of property I'd been holding on to for reasons I couldn't entirely explain. Sentiment, maybe. Insurance. The kind of thing you keep because you don't know what the future holds. I wired the money to Daniel the week before Thanksgiving. All of it. I didn't tell him where it came from. He didn't ask. They moved in the following spring. I helped Patricia hang curtains in the living room while the girls ran from empty room to empty room, their laughter echoing off the bare walls. She thanked me twice that day, once in the morning when I arrived and once when I left. Both times she was looking at her phone. I thought that was the beginning of something good, of a chapter where we all sat around a table in a house I had helped build, and I was welcome there because I had earned it. I was wrong about that the way you can only be wrong about something you believed for a very long time. Thanksgiving was my idea, in the beginning. I had always hosted. Warren and I had hosted before the girls were born, before Daniel and Patricia were married, back when it was just us and a few friends, and a turkey that was always a little dry, because Warren believed in cooking things thoroughly to the point of anxiety. After he died, I kept hosting because stopping felt like giving something else away. But 3 years into their new house, Patricia suggested they take over. Her mother had been coming from Cincinnati, she explained. It would be easier, more central. The girls were old enough now to want their own home to be the one with the good memories. I said, of course. I meant it. What I didn't know was that easier and more central meant I would arrive at 2 in the afternoon and leave by 7, that my casserole would be placed on the counter next to a grocery store pie and a gluten-free stuffing Patricia's mother brought, and that I would spend most of the meal talking to Lily, who was 9 and still interested in me. while the adults discussed a home renovation I hadn't heard about until that day. I didn't complain. That is important to understand. I smiled and helped with the dishes and said it was a lovely evening and drove home in the dark and sat in my car in my own driveway for 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I did that for 2 years. This year, I came early because I'd offered to help with the bird. Patricia had said, "Fine, come at 11, and I'd arrived at 10:50, with the casserole and a pecan pie and a bottle of wine I'd picked out carefully. I let myself in through the side door the way I always did. The way Daniel had told me was fine. The way Patricia had started locking last spring, but hadn't mentioned to me. It was unlocked that day. I came in quietly because the girls were watching something loud in the other room, and I didn't want to interrupt. I set the pie on the counter. I kept the casserole in my hands because it was still warm. That was when I heard them. Patricia and her mother, Carol, in the dining room. Their voices clear and easy, the way voices get when they think they're alone. "She'll try to take over the kitchen again," Patricia said. "She always does. Just keep her busy with something harmless," Carol said. "Last year she rearranged the whole serving table. My serving table. In my house. Does Daniel say anything?" A short laugh. "Daniel never says anything. He just disappears into the garage when it gets uncomfortable. Well, don't let her sit at the head of the table. It's embarrassing. She acts like she still owns the place." "I know. I've told him. She just doesn't understand that things are different now. That this is our home." I stood in the kitchen, with the casserole dish growing heavier by the second. Our home. The words sat in my chest like something swallowed wrong. I thought about the wire transfer. I thought about the land in Tennessee, the land my father had walked with me when I was 7 years old, pointing at the tree line and saying, "Someday this will matter." I thought about sitting in the bank office while a young man in a too large suit explained the paperwork, and how I'd signed my name 6 times without hesitating because Daniel had sounded so hopeful on the phone. I put the casserole in the refrigerator. I picked up my purse. I walked back out the side door and sat in my car in the driveway for a different kind of 10 minutes. This time I wasn't sad. I was thinking. I drove to the park on Elm and sat on a bench by the pond for a while. A man was walking a dog the color of autumn leaves. 2 small children were throwing bread to the ducks. The sky was that particular November white, flat and quiet, the kind that doesn't promise anything. I thought about Warren. He had always said I was too easy with people, not in a cruel way, just in the way he noticed things about me that I couldn't always see myself. "You fold yourself up so they fit better," he used to say. "You don't have to keep doing that." He meant Daniel mostly. How I adjusted my plans to his schedule. How I didn't mention when I needed something. How I had learned somewhere along the way that being low maintenance was the price of being kept around. I had thought that was love. Lately, I was less sure. When I got home, I made myself tea and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, the same way I used to when I was balancing the household accounts every month. Old habit. It helps me think in straight lines. I wrote down what I had given Daniel since Warren died. Not from memory alone. I have always kept records. It is a quality Patricia would probably find old-fashioned. I find it clarifying. The down payment, the closing costs, the reserves. The money I sent when Lily needed occupational therapy, and their insurance only covered half. The new furnace the previous fall, when Daniel called on a Sunday at 6 instead of 7, which meant something was wrong. The car repair the spring before last. The school trip deposit for June that Patricia mentioned in passing, and I offered to cover before she had to ask. I added the numbers 3 times because the total seemed too large the first 2. It was just over $74,000 in 6 years. I sat with that number for a long time, not with anger exactly, with something quieter and more clarifying. The feeling of seeing a thing you have known in pieces all at once, assembled, true. I had given them the foundation of their life, the walls of their home, the equity they were already building. And I had done it while driving myself to doctor's appointments alone and eating dinner at this table, in a silence that was now so familiar I had stopped noticing it. The casserole was still at their house, in their refrigerator. I thought about that and almost smiled. I called my attorney in the morning. His name is Gerald Marsh, and I have known him for 20 years, since he handled Warren's first business contract, and I brought him a tin of peanut brittle at Christmas, and he ate the whole thing in one sitting. He is a careful man, and he listens the way careful men do, without interrupting, without rushing to solutions. I told him I wanted to review my estate documents. I told him some things had changed. He said, "Come in Thursday." I said I'd be there at 9. On Wednesday, I called my financial advisor, a woman named Barbara Yuen, who had helped me manage what Warren left behind with the same steady competence she brought to everything. I told her I wanted to restructure my giving, that I had been operating on an assumption that was no longer accurate, and I needed the numbers to reflect my actual intentions. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is everything okay, Ruth?" I said, "It is now. I think it is now." Gerald's office smelled like old paper and good coffee. He had a way of making you feel that whatever you brought through his door had been brought by sensible people before you, and he had helped them all. I found it useful. I told him I wanted to remove Daniel from my will as primary beneficiary. I told him I wanted to establish a trust in Warren's name for a scholarship at the technical college, where Warren had taught woodworking one semester and called it the best 3 months of his professional life. I told him I wanted a modest annual gift directed to my neighbor Iris, who had been bringing me soup every time I got a cold for 11 years and had never once asked me for anything. Gerald wrote carefully. He did not look surprised. In my experience, estate attorneys are rarely surprised. They have seen too much of what families do to each other across time. He asked if I wanted the changes communicated to Daniel. I said no. Let it stand until it's needed. If it's needed. He nodded and kept writing. When we were done, he said, "You know, I handled my father's estate after he passed. He had left a letter in the documents, not for the lawyers, just for the people he loved, handwritten. My sister still has hers." I thought about that on the drive home. I thought about what I would say in a letter. I thought about whether I had anything left to explain, or whether the numbers in that legal pad said it plainly enough. I decided I wasn't ready to write letters yet, but I kept the idea the way you keep a door you haven't opened. Thanksgiving passed. I did not go. I called Daniel the morning of and said I wasn't feeling well. He sounded distracted. He said, "Feel better," and that was the end of it. No follow-up call, no text from Patricia. A small drawing from Lily arrived in the mail 4 days later, a turkey made from a traced hand, orange and brown and slightly smeared. That I kept. That I put on the refrigerator. I spent Thanksgiving with Iris and her daughter Vera, who was visiting from Atlanta with her 2 boys and a kind of warm, noisy energy that filled the house up to the ceiling. Iris made a turkey that was genuinely better than mine. I brought the casserole and the pecan pie. We ate at a folding table in the living room because the dining table wasn't big enough and nobody cared. Vera asked me how I took my coffee and then remembered for every cup after that. That small thing sat in my chest like warmth for the rest of the evening. We talked about her job, a middle school art program she was trying to keep funded. We talked about her boys, the older one serious and careful like his mother, the younger one already full of opinions about everything. We talked about Iris, who had learned to use her phone's voice assistant and was now asking it questions about everything from medication interactions to the history of the Byzantine Empire. Nobody asked me to stay out of the way. Nobody talked across me. Nobody made me feel like furniture that had been there so long it was simply assumed. I drove home with the empty casserole dish on the passenger seat and thought, this is what I was trading for. I had been trading this for a seat at a table where I was tolerated. That is a poor exchange. It took me longer than it should have to see it. Daniel called on Sunday, the week after Thanksgiving. Right on time, 7 o'clock. He said Patricia had mentioned I hadn't come. He said he hoped I was feeling better. I said I was. There was a pause. The kind that means something is sitting in someone's chest, and they're deciding whether to set it down. He said, "Lily missed you." I said I missed her too, that I'd gotten her drawing. Another pause. Then, "Mom, is everything okay?" I thought about the hallway, the casserole dish, the land in Tennessee, the number on the legal pad. I said, "I've been doing some thinking, Daniel, about what things look like going forward. I'd like to talk to you in person, not on the phone." He said, "Okay. Is something wrong?" I said, "Not wrong, just different. I'll explain when I see you." He came on a Tuesday, which was also unusual. He sat at my kitchen table in the same chair he had sat in since he was a boy, and he held his coffee mug the same way Warren used to, with both hands even when it was no longer hot. I did not lead with the money. I have learned, over 68 years, that leading with money closes people before they have finished opening. I led with the hallway. I told him what I had heard, not dramatically. Just plainly, the way you tell someone you found a crack in a wall that had been there longer than you knew. He was quiet for a long time. He said, "I didn't know you heard that." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "Patricia doesn't mean," and then he stopped himself. He has enough of Warren in him to know when an excuse is just noise. I said, "I'm not here to talk about Patricia. I'm here to talk about you and me." He looked at me then. Not the way you look at a problem, the way you look at something you've been passing every day and suddenly see clearly. I told him about the legal pad. Not all the numbers, but enough. I told him about the land in Tennessee and why it had mattered to me. I told him that I had given because I wanted to give, and that I did not regret it, but that I had expected something in return that wasn't money and wasn't casseroles. I had expected to matter, to be spoken to and not around, to sit at the head of a table I had helped build, not because I needed the position, but because it would have meant someone understood what had been given. He put his hands flat on the table. He said, "I didn't know about the land." I said, "I know. You didn't ask." He was quiet again. Then, "Mom, I'm sorry." He said it like he meant it, not like he was trying to get somewhere with it, not like it was a step toward the next thing. Just said it and let it sit. I nodded. "I'm not looking for apologies," I told him. "I am looking for something to be different." He said he understood. I believed him partially, which was more than I had believed before. I poured us each more coffee. We sat for another hour. He told me about a problem at work, something he hadn't mentioned on our Sunday calls. I told him about Iris's Thanksgiving, about Vera's boys, about the art program. He laughed at the story about the voice assistant and the Byzantine Empire. It was a real laugh. I had not heard one of those from him in longer than I could name. Before he left, he stood in the doorway and said, "Can I come back? Next week, maybe?" "No occasion," I said. "You can always come back, Daniel, but don't come with your hand out." He flinched just slightly. Then he nodded. "I will," he said. Just me. Patricia called on a Friday, 11 days later. I let it ring twice before I answered, which I am not ashamed of. Her voice was careful, the kind of careful that comes from practiced women who are used to managing impressions. She said she wanted to talk, that she'd been thinking about Thanksgiving, that she knew something was off. I said, "Come by if you want to talk. I don't do this on the phone." She came on Saturday afternoon in a coat too thin for November and a manner that was pulled back in the way of someone who had argued with themselves the whole drive over. I made tea. I did not make it comfortable faster than it needed to be. She sat across from me and said, "I know you heard us." I said, "Yes." She said, "I need you to know that I don't think of you the way it sounded." I looked at her. She has never been easy to read. Patricia. She is a private person, which I have always respected, but which has sometimes been used as a door that only opens from her side. I said, "Tell me how you do think of me then." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I did not expect. She said, I think I've been afraid of you since the beginning. You and Daniel have this language I've never been part of, this whole history that predates me, and I never knew how to fit into it. So I think I decided it was easier to keep you at the edge of things than to figure out how to make room. I sat with that. It was honest enough to deserve sitting with. I said, I understand being afraid of something you don't know how to hold. But fear is not an excuse for cruelty, Patricia. And what you said in that dining room was cruel, whether you meant it for my ears or not. She didn't argue. That told me something. She said, I know, I'm sorry. I said it, and I knew it was wrong. And I said it anyway, because Carol was there, and I wanted her to think I had everything managed. I thought about all the times I had said things I was not proud of in order to appear like I had everything managed. I thought about how that impulse never fully went away. It just changed shape. I said, I'm not asking to be at the center of your life. I know that's not what this is. But I am asking to be treated like a person who has given something real, who has some claim on basic decency in a house that would not exist without her. Patricia's eyes were very still. She said quietly, You mean the money? I said, I mean all of it. The money is just the part that has a number. We drank our tea. She stayed for almost 2 hours. We did not solve everything, because you don't solve everything in an afternoon over tea in a kitchen in November. But there was something different in the room when she left. Not warmth exactly. More like honesty, which can feel cold at first but holds the heat longer. She stopped at the door and said, Can I bring the girls by sometime? Lily keeps asking about your casserole. I said, Tell her it's not a secret recipe. Tell her I'll show her how to make it. Something moved across Patricia's face. I think it was relief. Lily came the following Saturday with her rubber boots, and a very serious notebook, she said, was for taking down the recipe. Exactly. She is 9 years old and already thorough in the way that sometimes skips a generation. Warren was like that. Everything written down, everything kept. We made the casserole together. She measured the brown sugar with the gravity of a chemist and asked me 3 times whether pecans had to be in a ring or could they be scattered. And when I said either was fine, she chose the ring, which told me a lot about her. While we worked, she said, My mom said you were sad at Thanksgiving. I said, Not sad exactly. Tired. She looked at the bowl. Is that why you didn't come? I said, partly. She was quiet for a moment, pressing pecans into the surface with tremendous concentration. Then she said, My dad cried a little when you called. After he got off the phone, I stilled. She said it matter-of-factly, the way children report true things, without understanding the full weight of them or needing to. She said, I don't think he knew I could see him from the hallway. He was in the kitchen. I turned back to the oven before she could see my face. I thought about Daniel in the kitchen. I thought about the hallways in our lives, the ones we stand in and the ones we don't realize other people are standing in. I thought about all the things passed through in a house, grief and pride and money and silence and love in all its awkward, insufficient forms. I said, Your dad is a good man. He is learning some things a little late. But learning late is better than not learning. Lily wrote that down in her notebook. I didn't stop her. December came in quietly. The first hard frost turned the yard silver overnight, and I stood at the kitchen window in the morning with my coffee and watched it catch the light. The maple Warren planted the year Daniel was born was bare now, just the shape of it against the sky. But even bare it was something. Even in winter you could see how it was built to hold weight. Iris came over on a Thursday with gingerbread and her voice assistant questions about the history of mistletoe, which led to an hour I did not anticipate. Vera called from Atlanta. She had gotten 2 more weeks of funding for the art program. She called me specifically to tell me that, which was unexpected and meant more than she probably knew. Daniel came by twice without Patricia. We did not always talk about the hard things. Sometimes we just sat, the way you can with people you have known your whole life, in the particular silence of a house that remembers you. He fixed the hinge on my back gate that had been sticking since September. He ate soup. He told me about the thing at work. He did not look at his phone. I did not tell him about the will. That was not a conversation for the kitchen in December. That was a document that would speak for itself when the time came. And I had written it with the care of someone who intended to be understood correctly. Finally, even if she was no longer there to explain it. I thought about Gerald's father's letters. I sat down one evening and wrote 3, not long ones, just the true things, the ones that never got said over 12-minute phone calls or polite holiday meals. One for Daniel, one for Lily, one for Vera, which surprised me until I started writing it and then made complete sense. I sealed them and put them in the folder with the legal documents, not because I was planning anything, just because I understood, at 68, that the things left unsaid were the ones that haunted people, and I had spent enough years in other people's hallways. I preferred the things I meant to be heard in my own voice, in my own time, on my own terms. The mail came on a Tuesday, and there was a card from Patricia. No occasion. Just a card with a cardinal on the front, the kind you find in the rack by the register, without thinking too much about it, except she had crossed out the printed sentiment and written underneath in her careful handwriting, "Thank you for teaching Lily the recipe. She made it for us last Sunday. She used the ring. I thought you'd want to know." I held the card for a moment. Then I put it on the refrigerator, next to Lily's turkey. My house in December was quiet and warm and entirely mine. No garland I didn't want. No centerpiece chosen by someone else's taste. No performance of welcome at a table where welcome was only conditional. I made my coffee in the morning the way I liked it, strong enough to hold a spoon upright, which was a thing Warren used to say, and which I had always found both irritating and accurate. I ate breakfast at the table by the window. I read. I called Iris. I went to the hardware store and bought the kind of light bulbs I preferred without consulting anyone. Small freedoms. But they were mine, and they were whole, and they had cost me $74,000 and 2 years of Sunday calls and a casserole dish left in a stranger's refrigerator before I understood their value. I had not won anything. Families don't work that way. You don't win families, you survive them. And sometimes, if you're patient and you're honest and you stop folding yourself up so everyone else fits better, you find a shape that is actually yours. I was still finding mine, but I was finding it. On a Saturday morning in the second week of December, I walked past the maple in the backyard, the one Warren planted, the one that was bare now but built for weight, and I put my hand on the bark for just a moment, cold and rough and real. I went back inside and made 2 cups of coffee. Daniel was coming at 10. No occasion. We were still learning the language of that. But we were learning. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Somewhere out there, a woman is standing in a hallway with her hands full and her name on documents nobody has thought to read. She needs to know it is not too late to set things down. It is never too late to decide what you're worth.